Well then, a housing crisis is crippling the lives of renters as high demand and staggering drop-off in properties that are available is resulting in tenants across the country facing a dramatic increase in the price.
For example, the price of a month's rent in Manchester has increased 20.5% compared to this time last year. Rentals in Birmingham have seen an increase of 17.6%.
In London, it's been a 16.1% hit. That's the increase in rent prices in the capital, with the average rent price now reaching a record £2,343 per calendar month. That's the highest in the country.
The Mayor of London is Sadiq Khan, and he is calling for a 2-year rent freeze, and he joins us now. Very good morning to you, Mr. Khan.
Morning.
I'm sure that people who are renting would fully support the idea of a rent freeze. The trouble is, what does that do to the landlords providing the accommodation?
Well, look, there are 2.6 million Londoners who rent from a private landlord. What this research that we've published today shows is 4 out of 10 of those are really worried over the next 6 months they'll be unable to pay their rents, which could mean them becoming homeless. In Scotland, Labour politicians and many others were successful in persuading the Scottish government to introduce a rent freeze. The sky's not fallen in. In fact, 40% of landlords who own a property own it without a mortgage. And the choice is this: people will be made homeless because they can't afford to pay their rent, or landlords making a bit less profit. I know what I'd choose.
How do you actually enforce it? How does it actually work, a rent freeze?
So what's happened in Scotland is, because of the pressure from Labour and others, legislation was introduced which said basically a landlord in Scotland at 6 months, I'm asking for 2 years in London, weren't allowed to increase rents. And if they did, and you're a tenant, you could apply to have that rent increase not taking place. And the reason why it's important, Richard, is you've got people in London, across the country, dealing with a cost of living crisis. The energy bills are going up. You've seen inflation at 10%, but Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak are saying taxes are going to go up. So something's got to give. And they simply can't afford to pay the £2,500 a month on top of all the other things. And by the way, over the last year, the increase in rents in London is the biggest since records began.
Yeah, we just said that. Look, rather than possibly imposing this kind of freeze for 2 years, what about restricting landlords' right to evict tenants who can't pay?
This is a really important point. So we successfully lobbied the government to, during the pandemic, stop during the pandemic landlords being able to evict, extend the notice period where there are a need for people to leave to 6 months. And that led to, during the pandemic, far fewer people suffering the way they could over the next few months and possibly the next year. So the government has in the past been supportive to tenants. And the second big thing that the government could do, which they promised they would do, but they've delayed it, is end what's called no-fault eviction. That means that a landlord should only be able to evict if there's a good reason, rather than simply because they want to get the tenant out and increase the rent. And by the way, we're talking about 2.6 million Londoners, fathers, mothers, grandparents and children who are really worried about whether they can make ends meet over the next few months.
OK. You said that since it's been introduced in Scotland, the sky hasn't fallen in. Hasn't been introduced for very long. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Scottish Association of Landlords says he's been inundated by landlords saying they'll remove their vacant properties from the rental market. Who on earth is going to let a property in the knowledge they will be unable to meet their own financial and maintenance obligations if their tenants don't pay the rent or their outgoings increase? I mean, the problem is that a rent freeze only works for one half of the party involved in the contract, doesn't it?
Well, hold on a sec. 40% of properties that are let out are owned outright. There is no mortgage, number one.
So 60% have a mortgage then?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, so number two, the choice is a landlord with a mortgage making a bit less profit, or a family made homeless. But
No,
here's
but
the
Mr. Khan,
really important point.
No, but what the head of that landlords association is, it's not about making less profit. It's about actually providing the accommodation. If private landlords feel they're not going to be able to cover their costs, they will simply withdraw the property from the market, and that leads to a problem in the housing market. I mean, that is the problem with the long-term effect of a measure like this. Well, and I don't dispute for a moment that it would help the tenants, but it does not help the tenants if there are fewer properties on the market.
Sure. So if I could finish. So the choice the landlord has is to accept £2,500 now with a rent freeze, or zero because they've withdrawn the property from the market. How is withdrawing it from the market going to help them make their overheads?
Well, because
and here's the
presumably
point.
they don't
have maintenance, because they don't have responsibilities and the maintenance costs. I'm sorry, you asked a question because they don't have the responsibility of all the maintenance costs. But listen,
well, no, you do.
Surely,
Richard, you do.
But Mr. Mayor, surely you can't deny that in that 60% who do have a mortgage on their property of landlords, some of them are going to make a loss with their rise in mortgages. Mortgages are continuing to rise. What do you say to a landlord? Let's say there was one sitting here who looked you in the eye and said, I simply cannot afford to let this out because I will make a loss because of the amount of money I'm having to pay on my mortgage.
This was exactly the issue that arose during the pandemic. What the government did was gave a mortgage holiday. So for a period of time during the pandemic, you'll remember this, Susanna, we spoke about this during the pandemic. Because of the challenges many people had who had a mortgage, there was a mortgage holiday. Additionally, there were direct grants given by the government to councils to support what's called discretionary payments. So we're talking about, not in perpetuity, for there to be a rent freeze, although I am in favour of there being a system of rent controls in London. What I'm saying is for the short term, 2 years, this rent freeze will give so much stability and security to families. I'm also, by the way, saying it's incredibly important, and I think economists agree, we've got to get a grip with inflation because that has an impact on interest rates. But what you can't escape is that 4 out of 10 Londoners are facing the prospect of being homeless because rents are going up by 16, 17%. It's double the cost to rent in London than other parts of the country. A one-bedroom flat in London, you can get a three-bedroom home in other parts of the country. This is a particular problem in London, but other parts of the country also have similar challenges.
The trouble is, if landlords, as a consequence, withdraw their accommodation, what would that do to the housing stock? That's the issue that I can imagine people would be concerned about and already are in Scotland. I want to ask you about another issue this morning, Mr. Khan, because we understand that right now the Home Secretary, Suella Braveman, is signing a deal in order to encourage the French financially to crack down on the illegal crossings. What do you make of the way that we are handling migration in this country as the mayor in charge of London?
Well, first, I think we're conflating asylum seekers, refugees, international students, economic migrants, family reunion, and a whole host of other things that come within the broad umbrella of immigration and migration. I think we have, over decades and centuries, been a safe haven for those fleeing persecution, asylum seekers and refugees. I think it's important, though, for us to realise that by working closely with colleagues across the globe, it's how you address issues and concerns, whether it's climate change or whether it's issues around climate displacement or migration. Of course, we should work closely with our colleagues in France, with the European Union, those countries in North Africa to work together.
Do you welcome the measure to crack down on those boat crossings?
Well, I welcome measures to work collegiately with other colleagues. This by itself won't be enough. What you're seeing is 40,000 people risking their lives across the English Channel. A deal done today with France won't solve that problem. What we've got to be doing is providing safe passages for somebody who's a refugee fleeing persecution to come to the country. If there's no safe passage, whether you're a woman fleeing Iran or whether you're somebody fleeing Syria, you've got no choice but to pay money to criminal smugglers, gangsters, to bring you here. That's why this government's policy won't solve the issue of people, risking their lives to come to our country.
So where should we process that claim for asylum then?
Well, firstly, we've got to speed up the process. 10 years ago, 90% of cases were processed within 6 months. Now it's 3 out of 10. So you've got to speed up when somebody makes a claim for asylum. You've got to make sure if somebody is in another country around the world and they're claiming asylum, they can make a claim, to apply for refugee status as an asylum seeker, rather than risking your lives, paying sometimes thousands of pounds to criminals to try and get you to this country, often risking your lives and, I'm afraid, sometimes losing your lives.
Many of those criminals that you refer to are, we know, these are the stats, they're Albanians. What do Albanian gangs running these crossings from across the Channel? What's your take on the demonstration which happened in London at the weekend, where law-abiding, allowed to be here Albanians went on the march and said, we are being scapegoated, our nationality is being scapegoated here? Do you think that's a fair claim for them to make, or do you think we do have a specific problem with Albanian people?
No, there are criminals of all nationality. I think your DNA doesn't determine whether you're a criminal. There are organised gangs, international gangs, taking advantage of the chaos and crisis we're seeing with our country's immigration policies.
Yes, but they are predominantly Albanian. I just wonder if you have a view on that.
Well, I get briefings all the time about international gangsters and criminals. Some may be Albanian. There are other nationalities as well. So let's not tarnish an entire country in relation to the actions of a small minority. But there are people taking advantage of asylum seekers. Some of those men coming to this country may not be refugees, may be using that as a way to come to this country, and you've got to clamp down. It's possible to have a humane immigration policy, but also to make sure you've got better controls of your border. This government's failing on both things.
OK, and before we let you go, the Daily Mail reported that Jeremy Corbyn has been urged to stand as an independent candidate in the next election for London Mayor. Have you heard similar?
No, but listen, one of the joys of being the mayor is I get to give back to this wonderful country that gave me and my family so much, and this city that gave me and my family so much. I'm not surprised. There are many others who want to be the mayor of London. I'm looking forward to running again for a third time and trying to persuade Londoners to lend me their vote again, as they've given me the privilege of doing over the last two elections.
If you did run, it would split the Labour vote, wouldn't it? Might let the Tories in.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on who may or may not run. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow, Richard, you're going to run.
Never. I am as apolitical as they come, Mr Mayor. I am completely impartial.
Sadiq Khan, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thank you.